Hi, I'm Ryan Baker, and this is Big Day in Education. Today we're going to continue our discussion of knowledge inference, talking about some of the recent developments in the inference of student knowledge, specifically KT-IDEM and variants around it, and DKT. This is a fast-moving area. This lecture goes into some of the latest developments in our understanding of knowledge inference during online learning. One variant is modifying BKT so it can allow items to have multiple skills rather than solely one skill per item. So one variant of BKT that people have studied is extending it to allow items to have multiple skills. This addresses some of the same goals as PFA. The idea being, we kind of know that it's unlikely for an item to really involve only one cognitive skill unless you've designed the environment very specifically for that. However, it turns out that simply extending BKT to allow items to have multiple skills is less effective than other ways of representing multiple skills. Another extension of BKT is modifications to include item difficulty. This addresses some of the same goals as IRT. The idea being, is it really true that if you have two items that involve the same skill, they really deep down are exactly the same difficulty? There's a few ways that people accomplish this. The first of them is KT-IDEM, where rather than having a single P of G and P of S for each skill, each item has its own P of G and P of S. Now, this may remind you a little bit of contextual guess and slip from the last lecture, but keep in mind, whereas there we were trying to really, situation by situation, estimate the current probability, was this action a guess or slip, here we're just saying, let's have different guess and slip for each item. Another variant that allows for differences in item difficulty is LFKT. In LFKT, rather than having a single P of G and P of S for each skill, guess and slip are contextually adjusted based on the skill, that's the classical P of G and P of S, but also the item and the student based on their past performance on other skills. So it kind of takes, like if you remember from the last lecture, Pardos's contextual estimation of L0, which averaged across previous skills, it uses that to estimate student-based changes to P of G and P of S, has skill-based levels for G and S, and item-based levels. It puts those all together to get a contextual guess and slip that nonetheless is far simpler than the contextual guess and slip in Baker, Corbin, and Alavin. A third model that takes item difficulty into account is FAST plus item. This one actually substitutes logistic regression equations for the four parameters of Bayesian knowledge tracing, with coefficients for each skill and coefficients for each item. So it actually kind of ends up in the same place in terms of number of parameters, but it gets there in a different way. And Gonzalez, Brenes, and his colleagues found that this led to better prediction of student correctness than either traditional BKT or PFA. In contrast to the last three approaches, which attempted to include item-level data into the calculation of BKT, but still base themselves fundamentally on a BKT framework, Peach and his colleagues came up with an alternate framework called Deep Knowledge Tracing, or DKT. This framework is based on what's called deep learning, which is also known as recurrent neural networks or long short-term memory networks. Deep learning kind of being the commercial term for a set of algorithms that were around before there was that term. What DKT does is it fits on the sequence of student performance across skills, but it fits very complex functions using a recurrent neural network, which is a neural network, as you may remember from the first week, which transmits information over time across the sequence. In the initial paper by Peach, they reported massively better performance than original BKT or PFA. I mean, I'm talking like 0.2 difference, which is just colossally high. But then it turned out that Xiong et al. Reported that Peach and his colleagues had used the same data points for both the training and test sets due to miscommunication about the data set. I'm not saying actually that they used data from the same student in both the training and test folds, which already would be problematic, but literally the exact same data points were used to predict themselves. Turns out that DKT doesn't do quite as well when this error is fixed, but it's still actually moderately better than original PFA or BKT. Subsequent to this, Kaja et al. Reported goodness on the same dataset when using modern extensions to BKT. So Peach and colleagues were comparing themselves to original BKT, the 1995 approach. Kaja and colleagues said, what happens when we compare to modern extensions of BKT, like I've been talking about in this lecture. They also compared DKT to modern extensions of BKT for new dataset. And what they found was that DKT and modern extensions of BKT appear to perform comparably well. So at the moment, rather than DKT being this transformative new approach that completely transforms everything, better than all previous approaches, it appears to be a good approach that's kind of comparable to the best of what's coming out of modern extensions to BKT. But watch this space. The current state of the art may be very different by 2018. Literally, the last couple of years, it's kind of awesome, really, because from about 1995 to about 2013, 2014, BKT was the unchallenged king of the hill. Nothing was reliably better, nothing anyone could do. And then suddenly, since 2013 or so, every single year there's been a new kind of answer to what's best. So this is a really exciting space, and who knows, DKT could turn out to be way better with some extensions. There could be some new extension of BKT, some hybridization, maybe some sort of ensemble across different approaches that could turn out to be way better than anything we currently have. So these are exciting times, and this lecture is going to look dated, probably even by the time you watch it. One thing to think about, though, as you hear all of the impressive results about how great DKT and FAST and all these other approaches is, what they're doing is they're getting better prediction of immediate future correctness in the learning system. And I'll ask you, is prediction of immediate future correctness even the right indicator? Are skill estimates more useful when prediction of immediate future correctness is better? The original idea of predicting immediate future correctness was to do better at estimating what a student's latent knowledge was. To me, these approaches, though they're better at predicting what a student will do right away, I won't really be convinced that they're any better than classical BKT until we can conclusively answer that question, which, probably to be fair, will be answered by the time you're watching this video. Next up, we're going to talk about memory algorithms, which explicitly look at this question, not of will a student do better right away, but will a student do better in the future? Thank you very much. I'm Ryan Baker. This is Big Day in Education.